everybody. David Fogel back with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation, back for another Symphonina podcast. And this day I'm joined by Grammy-winning conductor Michael Repper. Michael, how are you?
I'm great. Hey, thank you so much for having me, David.
Well, it's totally our pleasure and honor, really. As I understand it, you're the absolute youngest U.S. conductor to win a Grammy for Best Orchestral Performance.
Yeah, it's hard for me to believe, too. Yeah, thank you. And even more special that it was done with a bunch of young musicians.
Probably the youngest musicians to win Best Orchestral Performance, too.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
I would imagine. How much younger could they be? So Michael was conducting the New York Youth Symphony along with Michelle Kahn as the featured piano soloist on their album from 2 years ago. Please remind me of the title. I want to make sure I get it right because it was a composition of three composers, if I remember correctly.
Right. Works by Florence Price, Jesse Montgomery, and Valerie Coleman, who were the three composers that we featured on the disc.
And they, if I remember correctly, their background, three African-American women who composed about different things that were important to them, Ethiopian culture in America and other things like that. If I remember incorrectly, correct me.
So the three composers, one of whom is a composer of the past, Florence Price, who passed away quite some time ago, and was writing in decades ago, earlier 20th century. And so her style is very much of that period. Jesse Montgomery and Valerie Coleman are two of the world's greatest living composers writing today, and both of their music was much more modern. Really just fantastic music. And the disc included Florence Price's piano concerto, which was the first time that it had ever been recorded in its original form, with the orchestra, because the orchestrations had been lost or covered up.
Wow.
And Michelle played so well on that. And yeah, the entire disc is just great music, but they were all world premiere recordings.
Yeah. Let me back up a second. How did you find your way to be conducting the New York Youth Symphony?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's funny. New York Youth Symphony was my first big major gig. And it was a huge honor to become the music director of the New York Youth Symphony. You look at the pedigree of, some of the other conductors that have been music director of the New York Youth Symphony, going all the way back to Leonard Slacken, for example. I have big shoes to fill, is how I felt in that moment, because it was a huge honor. And New York Youth Symphony is considered, one of the finest youth orchestras in the world. So actually, it was a job posting, just like any other job posting. And as conductors, we go through that just as well. Apply. I had just gotten out of my doctorate program at Peabody, and New York Youth Symphony, to their credit, they like to try to identify younger conductors whom they consider to be talented, but maybe are slightly less experienced, which I was, and I took the job in 2016 or 2017. I didn't have a ton of experience, to be honest, at that time. And that's one of the most special things about New York Youth Symphony was they could well, especially with their reputation, find a 50, 60-year-old conductor who is doing fantastic things and has decades of experience, and there would be nothing wrong with that. But a huge part of their mission is to find a younger conductor that they can help nurture. And I definitely grew a lot by being with the New York Youth Symphony. So that's how I started. It was the audition was in 2016, and I took the job in 2017. And at that time, because New York Youth Symphony is based at Carnegie Hall, and they do all their performances at Carnegie Hall, if you had asked me in 2015, Mike, when do you think you'll have the opportunity to perform at Carnegie Hall? I might have said, it'll happen maybe once in my career, because that's what most people, it's a huge amount of luck goes into that. And so to have been music director at an orchestra that was performing there several times a year was just a gigantic honor and a huge, huge privilege.
I think a lot of our listeners, and me included, would understand what an audition for like principal clarinet would be, or a piano part, or whatever it might be. But what is the audition like for conducting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Each orchestra is a little bit different. And of course, the scenario looks a little bit different for a youth orchestra as it might a professional orchestra. For a youth orchestra, an organization that's really doing their job right in terms of looking for their music director is going to want to see their candidates work with the young musicians in rehearsal. right? Because a huge part about being a music director of a youth orchestra is the ability to connect with young people on a truly visceral level, on a mentorship level, can energize young people and can help them grow even within a rehearsal. It has the ability to, especially at New York Youth Symphony, where the musical level is so high. I mean, these kids are playing just as well as professional orchestras. The ability to get that level of musicianship out of the musicians and help them grow to their highest ability is a skill set, that people need for young people. So for New York Youth Symphony, I submitted a CV and a resume, went through several auditions. Eventually, they had it narrowed down to 6 candidates, and they invited all 6 of us to come for a series of in-person interviews and also to lead the orchestra in rehearsal that they watched. And to the orchestra's credit, I mean, to the organization's credit, they asked for feedback from the young musicians. So they took the young musicians' opinions into account, and I think that's incredibly important. The audition cycle for a professional orchestra is similar but different in some ways. I mean, typically there will be, there definitely will be a series of interviews and things that you go through, and then typically you'll be invited to come do either one or a series of actual concerts where the orchestra can get a feel for how what's the vibe, and do you connect? Because fundamentally, in hiring a conductor, you're trying to hire your new leader, right? And that's fundamentally what conducting is just leading. So does the conductor's vision match with the organization's vision and the organization's mission? Does that match the conductor's mission? That can all be sussed out during interviews, but then when you actually get up on the podium, do you relate to the musicians? Are you making good music together? Do you relate to the audience? And so a music directorship audition cycle can take years, 2, sometimes 3 years or more.
Wow. Okay. And it must be highly competitive too, I would imagine.
Yes, there are far more conductors and far more qualified conductors than there are positions. It's just a curse of what it is. But the good news is you can always find ways to make really great music no matter where you are.
Well, congratulations again on that. And I was
Thank you.
looking at some of the video that you had with regard to how you made the music, made the recording, and it was back in COVID time. I totally relate to it because, as you may know, for our albums that we do, one of the symphoninas that we record is recorded by our International Symphonina Orchestra, which is everybody around the world plays their part separately.
Mhm.
And then I do the mixing to make it sound like everybody played together. You had a kind of similar thing because of COVID where you had to record different parts and then pay a backing track to people and have, your engineers or you,
Yeah,
I don't know, put it all together. So
it,
I totally
it was the
appreciate
only
that.
way. Yeah, the way that I say it, yeah, we recorded in November 2020, so it was before even vaccines. And so we had to be extremely careful. And we recorded in the room where we actually typically meet, which is gigantic. And people who are familiar with New York City will know that we recorded at the Domena Center. And it's a premier location for both recording and also for rehearsal for orchestras. And it's a gigantic room there, huge. You can fit hundreds of people in that room. And it was calculated that we could fit 33, I think, provided that everybody was masked and distanced and all of those things. So yeah, we did have to record it in groups. Thankfully, we didn't record it individually, but we did record it in
Yeah.
groups. Actually, the way that I say it is, I'm really glad that it happened that way, but then we figured out a way to make it work.
Yeah, it happened
I
at
hope
all,
that it
right? I
never
mean,
has
it's
to be done
crazy.
that way.
Yeah.
I hope that it never has to be done that way again. But the entire point of that album, in sort of conceiving of the idea of making a recording, was to teach the young musicians how to record. Because fundamentally, the technique, and anybody listening to this podcast who's a musician will understand this, that the technique for playing to a microphone is fundamentally different than playing in a concert setting where you have a gigantic ensemble around you. It's a very different way psychologically of going about how you're going to do that. And there's a technique when you're recording in groups and you might be playing to a backing track of wearing a headset, for example, and playing. How do you do that and play musically at the same time? If you happen to have to use a click track, which for some of the things that we recorded, we did. There was no way to do it except for to use a click track. How do you play to a click track and play musically at the same time? There was a massive skill set that these young people unlocked that will serve them as they go into their professional careers as musicians, because many professional musicians just sort of get thrown into the deep end that way. Their first time making a recording, they're not used to it, and it can be hard. It can be very, very hard. So I'm very proud of how we did it, and New York Youth Symphony's next album can be made the normal way.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I wish you that. I wish you that. I hope we all have. And again, I think it's easy here in March of 2025 to forget what we just went through. Really,
Yeah,
how quickly we
five
forget, as they
years,
say.
5 years ago.
And New York City had it very tough.
Yeah,
And so, it's not just that you put it together, you put it together in one of the many ground zeros that there were. So congratulations in
thank you.
multiple ways
Thank
for
you.
all that. I understand you are a bit of a TikTok star.
Yeah, I was kind of a holdout on TikTok. I didn't start using TikTok until, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. And I don't know why that was, but I've fallen in love with it. TikTok has provided a really great way to connect with people who are interested in learning about conducting, interested in the whole, art form of what it is. And I've met some truly fascinating people who have reached out, and I never thought that a TikTok channel, about conducting could reach tens of thousands of people, and it continues to grow. And on the TikTok channel, I talk about technique. I show how I would conduct certain things. People ask me questions. We talk about musical, sort of things that are happening in the musical news of the time. I have a blast with TikTok, and I do hope that the platform sticks around, because it for me anyway, my experience with it is that it's been almost universally positive, and in a way to connect with people. It feels like a super fun way to sort of let loose on social media, whereas to me, Instagram and Facebook kind of feel a little bit different in terms of how you can present yourself and how you go about it. And yeah, I have a lot of fun. Just yesterday, I posted a video conducting, not that the piece would ever be conducted by a conductor, but showing how you can work on your technique as a conductor and build, for example, hand interdependence, independence between your right hand and your left hand by conducting melodies of pop songs. So I conducted a Gracie Abrams song, just showing how the way that she conducts in the melody, you can work on your technique so that when you're then working with an orchestra, you've actually built the muscles necessary to do those things. And so TikTok has provided a platform for that. And I'm blessed that the channel has taken off. And whether I could be considered a TikTok star, I don't know. But I do have many followers, and I'm very thankful for the community. And I love reading the comments. I always get a lot of really good questions and, interest in doing XYZ. Hey, would you conduct this, blah, blah, blah. It's fun. It's a fun platform.
I think being a star, it just depends on who you're being compared against in any category, really. So, you may not have as many followers as Beyonce, but
That's
I
right.
bet as far as other conductors go, you're right up there. So I think
I appreciate that. Yeah, and in the end, it's not really a competition. But
no.
I also genuinely do enjoy connecting with my followers, and I love it when they reach out to me. I get DMs all the time. I've had people who have connected with me on TikTok. They'll go to my website and they'll send me a message just through the message platform on my website and say, hey, I'm 18, I'm 20, I'm interested in conducting, came across your thing. I would love to connect with you. I'd love to have a Zoom. Could we talk about what I'd love to show you some of my video? And of course, I always say yes to that because it's just wonderful. I've met people from literally all over the world who are doing this, and they've connected through TikTok of all places.
That's great.
Um, yeah.
We found a lot of our players for the International Symphony Orchestra on TikTok
Oh,
also.
there
And
you go.
our
So,
principal clarinetist, Julie Vivaldo, has about 25,000 followers. She's in the LA Symphonic Winds up in Southern
uh-huh.
California here. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's great. I think TikTok's a great platform for sharing music of all sorts.
It is 100%. Hey, and everybody likes some cat videos, right?
or
So
whatever
so
else,
so if
yes.
you're there and you're scrolling a little bit, and I have to be careful not to scroll too much because you really, your time can go away
Yeah.
quickly, because it is addicting. There's no question that it's addicting. But anyway, my handle for anybody listening is at repertoire with two P's, because
You better spell that out, Michael.
yeah, REPPERTOIRE.
Very good.
Um, and you can also find me at Mike Repper, also my name, Mike Repper will also work.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, I repertoire is my last name is Repper, Repper. It's like pepper, but with an R. At summer camp, I used people used to call me Repertoire, because I was at a
Oh,
nerd, piano camp when I was a kid, and so that kind of stuck,
that's
and became my social media
well,
handle.
let's go back to being a kid. So you got started with piano. We were talking a little bit before we got started on the podcast about different instruments we played. And you started with the piano, I guess, but we've tried many things. We've tried some of the same things and
Yeah.
some of the same challenges. Let's how did you get into music in the first place?
Yeah, I used to go. I am actually from Southern California myself originally, and grew up all in Southern California until I went to college. And my grandmother, who was a pianist, she wasn't a concert pianist, but she was a very accomplished pianist, a very, very, very talented pianist, used to take me to the Pacific Symphony for their children's concerts. At the time, they were called Mervin's Musical Mornings.
Nice.
And of course, those of us who grew up in Southern California will remember Mervin's.
Yep.
And I loved them. And these children's concerts, they continue. The family concerts, they still do them at the Pacific Symphony. And I would go, I was 4, give or take. And my grandmother would take me, and she would notice that many of the young kids that were there would be paying attention only somewhat. You know what I mean? That they'd be interested in some things, less interested in other things. Some of them, have more attention than others. For whatever reason, I also was kind of chaotic. But once the music started, I was locked in. And she noticed this. So she suggested to my mom that I start taking piano lessons. And there was a piano teacher who lived very nearby where we lived, a few minutes away from where we lived. So I started taking piano lessons. That's how piano started for me. When I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I would go to a summer camp for piano, and there was a teacher there from Melbourne, Australia, by the
Nice.
name of Hama Patkin, and she was extremely well known for good reason for educating young people in music. And when her students got to be into their late teens, she would hand them off to the next. I mean, her expertise was kids and young teens, and she was very well known, especially in Australia, for this. To make a long story short, she invited me to come basically live with her for some time in Australia, and take piano lessons with her and become part of her studio and immerse myself in all of the cool things that she would do. And she was on TV, and she had all kinds of other, she would hold lectures, and she was so vivacious, and she was a force to be reckoned with. When I was there, she hosted a series of concerts that she hired a little chamber orchestra to come in, and the whole idea, the conceit was, it was actually very similar to the Pacific Symphony concerts. And you'd have a bunch of kids come in and have a little bit of show, and it was supposed to introduce classical music to young people. And at one of these shows, there was supposed to be an actor there who was going to play the part of Franz Haydn. And she had a costume and a wig and everything. And
Okay.
but the actor didn't show up. And so she came to me like 4 seconds before the concert was supposed to start. And she said, "Hey, Mike, how would you like to dress up as Haydn? And, you can read the script and, just go through it." And I said, "Sure." So there I was. In fact, I have a photo I can find and send to you, of me in this ridiculous wig with this like robe from, the 18th century
How
that
old are
I
you?
was like 9 or 8 or
Oh
9
my
years old. So
gosh.
I went to
Okay.
the ground.
Yeah.
But one of Haydn's responsibilities in the show was to conduct the second movement of the Surprise Symphony.
Mm.
And I did not know the second movement of the Surprise Symphony. I had hardly spent any time around orchestras whatsoever. But of course, orchestras don't really need a conductor to get through the second movement of the Surprise Symphony. So I went up there, and they gave me one of those old 1990s style car antennas that, expanded, that went way out. It was taller than I was, standing up on there on the podium and waving my arms and doing whatever. And they played. And the big surprise that people will know in the second movement of the Surprise Symphony is this huge chord that comes out of nowhere, was just as much a surprise to me as it was to everybody else. And so
Yeah.
there was something in that moment that I can't explain it, but there was something in that moment that was like, I need to figure out what that is. Came back to the United States, was taking violin lessons, and it turned out that my violin teacher was also a conductor, and I had it in the back of my mind that I was interested in at least figuring out what this was. And he was kind enough to expand his lessons to include conducting as well. And eventually that just became straight up conducting. And I knew that I wanted to be a conductor. So I was very fortunate to know from basically the age of maybe 11 or 12, even subconsciously, that I wanted to be a conductor. I'm very, very fortunate for that, because I think many people don't come to that realization until even their 30s. And so I was very fortunate to sort of have the stars align in a crazy way. So yeah, that's how I got started in conducting.
Yeah. So
And
piano,
a huge
violin, and what else though?
clarinet and trombone.
Okay, got them all covered.
And I studied clarinet and trombone because I knew I wanted to have the experience of, what does it feel like to play a woodwind instrument? What does it feel like to play a brass instrument? I never studied them with the intention of pursuing them or being a soloist, but what is the technique? How does it feel? And that was actually very eye-opening for me because to that point I had never played. Your piano teachers and your violin teachers, they're always telling you have to breathe. And that's true, right? But I think that there's a certain amount of not truly knowing what that means until you feel your actual breath become the sound. And you don't really 100% get that experience unless you're a singer or you have an experience playing a woodwind instrument or a brass instrument or some other instrument that literally requires your breath to make the sound. And so I'm glad that I had that experience. And yeah, it was very informative. And I hope that it helps when I'm rehearsing orchestras that you can understand what's going through the mind of a clarinet player
Or the lungs, for that matter.
the
Or
lungs.
the
That's
lips,
right.
their embouchure,
That's
whatever.
exactly right.
You know.
Yeah, that's right. So,
Yeah, we
uh,
just recorded, I should say, with Budapest scoring with Jordan
mhm.
Janosko's symphony, prize-winning symphony that won our contest. It'll be on our album coming up, and
Awesome.
it's heavy duty brass in the third movement. And we definitely gave them a workout at one point. Peter Legge was saying, we need to give the trombonists a little bit of a break. So,
There you go.
1 minute, and then we're back at it. But yeah, you do have to keep those things in mind, and it well, you don't have to, but it sure helps when you do because the
Yeah,
players appreciate it and your
yeah,
music will appreciate it too. So,
that's right.
yeah.
That's exactly right. So, anyway, yeah, I knew when I went to my undergrad that I wanted to be a conductor. Through another crazy story, I ended up getting connected with Marin Alsop when I was about 13, and she became my mentor. Still is in many ways, one of my closest colleagues, and still, because I have such respect for Marin and everything that she does, and for her musicianship, and still we're extremely close. She was able to help guide me through the first, decade or two of making it as a conductor or trying to make it as a conductor. And I ended up moving to Baltimore to be closer to her and ended up working with her at the Baltimore Symphony for 2 seasons and getting my doctorate at Peabody.
Now you're involved with multiple symphony orchestras, if I understand correctly. Which
Yes.
maybe we can talk about some of the projects that you have ongoing, or whatever else you'd like to
Yeah.
feature about the symphonies that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am music director now of 3 orchestras, and one of them is the Ashland Symphony in Ohio. That's just outside of Cleveland, and that's actually where I am right now. I'm also the music director of the Mid-Atlantic Symphony, which is an orchestra just outside the DC area, DC, Baltimore area, both exceptional ensembles. And I'm also the music director of an orchestra called the Northern Neck Orchestra in Virginia. I'm very excited about that orchestra. Actually, it was my first job. I said earlier New York Youth Symphony was my first big job, and it really was. But Northern Neck Orchestra, I started working with them just slightly beforehand. At the time, I was 21 or 22. It was a perfect opportunity at that time for me because it was a really ragtag, very earnest, very wonderful community orchestra of varying abilities, people who loved music so much. I fell in love with all of them so quickly, and I knew that there was something really special that could be built there. And so now, 10 years later, actually, it's a fully professional orchestra that has a massive fan base within the area. I'm very excited about it, and so that orchestra's been my project, and in many ways has been a way for me to learn how to be a music director. And it's shaped my views of what music directing even is. It's more than just conducting. I mean, I think that for a music director, conducting is the most important part, but it's also like a baseline job requirement. Like if you can't go on the podium and you can't get the best quality best quality out of the musicians and make the best possible concert happen, then you're failing at the job. But also, like if you succeed at that part of it, to me, you're only really still doing about 70 to 80% of the job. That there's still another 20 or 30% left over that is so critical and so important to actually getting an A on your grade, which is connecting with the community and designing programs that are very specific specific to where you're performing. And so the Northern Neck Orchestra has been a really transformative experience for me because it's been a sandbox for me to learn how all of that works. And to have been the music director of an orchestra from my early 20s was a blessing. And in many ways, it's helped me now when I'm with Ashland Symphony and Mid-Atlantic Symphony, which are, fully, big professional orchestras, knowing how to do those sorts of things. So I'm very blessed for those experiences. So yeah, beyond those three orchestras, Half Stick will travel. This in a few weeks, I'm going to be doing the season finale at the Richmond Symphony. Really excited about that. That's Symphonie Fantastique and Palazzian Dances, and a wonderful piece called Anthropolis by Gabby Ortiz, who actually won the Grammy this year for her composition.
Hmm.
And with the LA Phil.
Yep.
So that's going to be a great concert, big concert. In a few months, I actually have two trips to South Africa this year. Return to the Stellenbosch Festival to conduct, and also I'm going to be debuting with the Johannesburg Symphony and with the KwaZulu-Natal Symphony there in South Africa, two of South Africa's biggest orchestras. And I just recorded a new album with the National Philharmonic, which is going to be coming out in August. And it's all music by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. I fell in love with Samuel Coleridge Taylor's works, and he turns 150 this year. I really did a lot of research, not just me, a team of people, really went in and tried to find music of his that hasn't been recorded before. Some of it the music didn't even exist. We had to, recreate a lot of things in order to make it happen. And I'm very excited for everybody to hear this because it's going to be all new music by Coleridge Taylor that nobody knows. Because in one of the cases we did a violin concerto with Curtis Stewart. By our research, we can't find any evidence that it was performed even once after 1904. So it felt thrilling to be sort of resurrecting some work. And yeah, I'm very excited about it. So
Yeah, you have to be a historian and a musician at the same time when
yeah,
you're doing stuff
that's
like
a
this.
huge part of it. But recording, and you and I are both very involved in recording and doing all of these things and with the Academy. And I so enjoy connecting with people's projects and things like that. And I get particularly excited in the classical space anyway. I get particularly excited anytime anybody's sharing something new. It's not that I have any feelings negatively against people who are re-recording things that have already been recorded, but recording is such a huge venture, especially the expense of it and the time that goes into it and all of these things, that I get so excited anytime anybody has tried to share something new. And so, there's just been so many excellent projects that have come out lately that are like that. And hopefully ours lives up to that as well. This is a composer that, he turns 150 this year. He died, 100 years ago, something. To find music of his that should get played more and probably would have gotten played more had his skin color not been black. I mean, if he had been white, I think that his music probably would have had a different trajectory after his death. To resurrect that work, I think is just, to resurrect his music felt thrilling. And I get so excited, especially in the classical space, to hear those work. The Experiential Orchestra this year had fantastic Julia Perry recordings. Things like that are just so exciting.
When
So that's
you're
why I love recording.
Yeah, when you're a music director, do you get the leeway to choose what sort of program you want to put together? And is it pre-funded so you have the freedom to do what you want to do, or do you have to convince people like, hey, I've got this plan, I've got this other plan, we have this
Yeah,
plan,
yes and
which one
no.
do you want to do? That kind of, how does it go?
Yeah, yes and no. So as a music director, talking about just a regular concert season, typically the way that it works is that a music director will put together an entire program proposal, and each orchestra will have their own variation of how that goes about getting approved. And usually there's a committee of some kind that includes the music director that goes through a process, and it might include some musicians, some administrators, board members, etc. And you go through and you find, and I love that process, and I love honestly not just being able to say this is what we're going to do, because I love that process of having the discussion, because a lot of times people will have really great ideas that I hadn't considered, and it's like, oh, that's a really good idea, and then we go a different route. So I love that collaborative aspect. As for recording in the classical space, there's almost never money that just exists for that kind of thing. Money needs to be raised to do that. I talked about this Coleridge Taylor album. I had the idea to do the album. I went to the National Philharmonic and proposed the idea. They loved the idea because they're all, just wonderful people, wonderful musicians, and all of these things. And I said, I would love to put this project together for you and I'll fundraise with you. So we had an agreement that I would raise a certain amount of money and and then they would raise a certain amount of money and the money gets raised
Hmm.
to do these projects. But knowing how to fundraise is a huge part of being a music director. The onus is to sort of come up with a project that's so exciting that you can go to somebody and say, I have a very exciting idea, and I would love it if you would consider supporting it. And I found that it's actually not that hard to raise money for good ideas. If you connect with people and show them why you're excited to do a project, why it excites you, why you think it's important, you can often find resonance there. And I'm not saying it was easy to fundraise for this project. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it also wasn't that difficult because it's a good idea. But that's a skill set in and of itself. And you go back to talking about the Northern Neck Orchestra, learning how to fundraise is not something that I would have probably learned how to do had I not taken that job. So yeah, I'm very, very
Good point.
thankful for the opportunities that
Yeah, you've leveraged all the experiences you've had ever since you were four. It's awesome. Every single thing has been taking advantage of
yeah,
what you've learned at each stage. It's a wonderful example for other people to follow. Really.
I appreciate that. I'm very blessed. I remember that I'm very privileged to have had those experiences and understanding of being in the right place at the right time, but also having the resources to take advantage of those opportunities. And so a huge part of what I try to do also is try to pay forward those opportunities to younger people. I have a Like I said, when we were talking about TikTok, I love connecting with people who are, starting their journey. I would be nowhere had it not been for people who were far more experienced than I was, taking a chance on me and making time for me for free most of the time.
Yep.
And so that's something that I try to do myself. And so anytime anybody wants to connect on that level, particularly young people, we'll always make time to try to help people grow and help people get into it. And I have a studio of conductors that sort of go through that. Even here at the Ashland Symphony, we have a fan club of young people, and it's great. A hugely diverse, wonderful group of kids who are all interested in different sorts of things, but musically related. And not all of them in performance. Some of them want to be audio engineers, and some of them want to be, other sorts of things. But and some of them want to be conductors, which is great. But I do what I can to try to help mentor them, and won't ever charge for it because it's like people didn't charge me. So that's just
That's
part
just
of I
wonderful.
think what it.
No, that's just wonderful. Michael, let's remind everybody on the way out here how they can get in touch with you to take advantage of that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So anybody can always reach out to me at my website, and you can also find what I'm up to at my website and my calendar. That's mikerepper.com, MikeRepper.com. My last name is Repper. It's like pepper with an R. And of course, I have a TikTok, I have Instagram and Facebook. You can find me just searching my name. If you go to my website, you'll get there. I also have a newsletter that you can sign up for on my website. And if there are any conductors or any musicians who are interested in becoming conductors or anything like that, please do reach out to me. I'm aware also that there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are heavily involved in the recording field and other sorts of things like that. And I am always loving to search for new collaborators. And so reach out to me with any ideas that anybody has. And if I can collaborate with you, I absolutely will. Because the more music, especially in this day and age, and with everything that's going on, the more music and the more art that we can be making, the better. We can't let anybody or anything keep us from doing that.
Exactly. Michael, thanks. Mike, thanks
Michael's
for all
fine,
your.
Mike, whatever.
Okay,
Yeah, hey
great.
guy over there.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. And we'll
Thank
listen to
you.
some more of your conducted music on the way out here. And we wish you all the best for 2025. I'm sure we'll be together again later in the year when you have new stuff for us to talk about.
I can't wait. Thank you very much for speaking with me. Have a great day.